Whole You podcast listeners, it's Dr. Janine Krause from the Health Fix podcast. It's a podcast where I talk about tips, tricks, and techniques to have sharp minds, limitless energy, and fit physiques for life. Check out episode 157 of the Happy Whole You podcast, where I talk about personalized wellness for slowing down the aging process. You're listening to the Happy Whole You podcast. Let's introduce you to Dr. Anna Marie Frank.
Hey you guys, today I have a special guest, Julia Blackwell, who is a fascia release practitioner, educator, and the creator of Fascia Remedy. Using this methodology, she's been able to solve her own bouts of lower back, knee, and neck pain in a matter of days, as well as helping others quickly alleviate pain, restore movement, and perform at their best. Julia has captivated a community of thousands with her unique bodywork, her fresh take on foam rolling, and her approach to discovering the root source of their pain. Her combination of fascia release, postural alignment, and mindset magic has earned her the nickname the Pain Relief Wizard from her community of both professional athletes and everyday movers. She is a Denver local, and we're about to hear some great tips from her, so get ready. Here we go. All right, Julia, thank you for joining me on the Happy Whole You podcast.
Hi, Dr. Anna Marie. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yes, I am excited to talk with you because we've never talked about fascia on the podcast. And I'm sure many people are like, well, what the heck is fascia? So maybe we could start there, just kind of set the tone of what your fascia is, what it does for the body, and then we can get into your story about how you became the professional that you are.
Sure. So, I'll start with the fact that I'm originally from Cincinnati, so I always call it fascia. That's just the hard A's that always happen with me, but I've heard it pronounced multiple ways. But fascia is our connective tissue. It's the biological fabric that holds absolutely everything in our body together. I often refer to it like a plastic wrap that wraps around every single thing. So every single muscle fiber, every muscle group, every bone, nerve, blood vessel, organ, it's all wrapped in this material. There's no way we can even remove it. It goes through us at a cellular level. If it were to, magically disappear out of your body, you would just go tumbling to the ground in a pile of goo for the most part.
Wouldn't you say like this is its own organ system?
Yes, absolutely. It has its own communication system. So it's not this sort of static, dead material that's just there for the wrapping. It does have its own proprioceptors, nerve endings. It has an entire communication network, which, man, we could talk about that for an hour in itself. It's so fascinating. It's essentially like the second nervous system that we have in our body.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you shared it like that. That makes sense to me. So what is it doing? So it's throughout our whole body, and what is it doing for our body, and what could be going wrong with it, which is where you were able to work through and heal yourself. If you could share a little bit about what is it doing in our body, and maybe when it like goes. I have so many questions. I'm throwing them all out there at the same time. Forgive me. I want to ask all the things at the same time. Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, we already alluded to, if it were to disappear out of your body, there goes your shape, your structure, your texture, right? So it is imperative to keeping our bodies together. It's what's responsible for our alignment and our posture, but it's also responsible for a couple more things. So our lymphatic system lives in our more superficial fascia, and that's how our body detoxes. So healthy fascia equals a healthy lymphatic system. Fascia also provides deep hydration and cellular nutrition to every single cell in our body. So we absolutely need it if we want to be hydrated. It's also what allows our muscles and joints to glide. So essentially, fascia holds the key or the potential for our body to move freely or not. It also has, we just talked about this too, those proprioceptive elements. So it's going to be very important for things like balance, for muscle control, for understanding where your body is in space. But if we're really looking on a deeper level, it's sort of letting us know what's happening in the world around us and where is our place within that world. It's communicating so much more than just these clinical, uh, more scientific things like, oh, my elbow is moving upward right now. It also is going to be taking on any emotions you might be having, any difficult experiences you might be going through. Fascia is also reading all of those types of responses in your body as well.
So is this why when some people get massages or they're stretching in certain ways, they start crying because of the
Oh,
emotion?
yes, absolutely. We can store emotions there, which is really like stuck energy, right? If
Mhm.
we go back to that plastic wrap analogy, if we think about something slowly shrink wrapping into this crumpled up ball of plastic wrap, blood flow gets stuck, lymphatic fluid gets stuck, muscles and nerves get trapped, but so does energy. And so there's often times where we finally release that crumpled up ball of plastic wrap, blood flow and energy literally get moving for the first time in a long time. And what are emotions? They're just energy in motion. So that's how a lot of those emotional releases tend to happen within fascia release as well.
I love that. Yes, we talk about energy on this podcast quite a bit, so that's
Oh,
great.
man. But yeah, you also asked, what can start to cause fascia to become unhealthy or problematic. There's a couple things. So underuse is probably the number one thing. Most of us aren't moving the way our bodies were intended. We spend a lot of time sitting. You and I are both sitting
Mhm.
for
I know,
this
I gotta, like,
conversation right
move
now.
around.
I know I am awkwardly sitting on the floor. I can't stand sitting in a chair. I'm such a child. I like need to be moving around and sitting in weird positions. But think about on a daily basis, are you really twisting and bending and lifting your arms over your head in these really dynamic ways? Probably not on a daily basis. Or
Mhm.
even if you go to the gym every single day, if the rest of the time you're sitting at a desk and then crashing on the couch to binge watch a Netflix show for a couple hours, that's still a lot of your week where you're pretty sedentary. So I would say that's the number one thing that starts to create more tension, restriction, and dehydration in the fascia over time. There is a little bit that happens with age, but age is not an excuse, my
Yeah.
friend. There's so much more into that. Um, but occasionally overuse will cause some fascial tension. I see it mostly in the world of sports where you're swinging a golf club hundreds and hundreds of times. You're performing the same motion over and over. You're swinging a tennis racket, what have you. And then stress is a big one. Stress can change fascia due to that communicative response that it has. And also any type of trauma, whether that be physical trauma, something like a car accident, a past traumatic injury, but also emotional trauma. So there's quite a few triggers that can start to slowly change fascia over time. And we likely don't even realize it's happening unless we've had that really intense impact injury. It's slow. It's the
Yeah.
slow progress until one day we bend down to tie our shoe and our back gets thrown out, or suddenly we wake up one day with terrible neck pain and we think, hold on, why did this happen? What have I done? And we're thinking, what have I done in the last day or two? When really it's the result of likely years and years of your fascia slowly turning into a different texture.
Yeah, adds up over time.
It does.
Okay. So this fascia realm that you are an expert in, what got you to this space? Like,
Oh yeah,
why fascia?
that's true. You did ask me that earlier. So many questions. So well, really, it's been a lifelong journey for me. So I was born with severe nerve damage in my right shoulder. I got stuck during the
Mm,
birthing process, and in the attempt to yank me out, the doctor stretched and tore most of the nerves up
Oh,
in my right shoulder. So while I did have a nerve regraft surgery at about 4 months old, they really did that surgery and sent me on my way and was like, good luck to you. I don't know that this will get much better than we got in this surgery. So I
wow.
grew up thinking there was nothing that was possible for me to continue this process. I did go to lots of different practitioners. I did physical therapy, I did occupational therapy, I did massage, chiropractic, acupuncture, really anything that you could think of that the Midwest in the 90s and early 2000s had to offer. But truly, nothing seemed to make a lasting impact or really make a difference at all. I was still left with this tightness in my arm. There was limited mobility, limited strength, just a general feeling of being uncomfortable in my body.
So what
And
were some things that you couldn't do or you struggled doing, just to kind of paint the picture of, how it impacted your day to day? I mean, obviously you were in pain, which we all know being in pain will impact our day to day, but was like the mobility aspect?
well, the mobility aspect, I think, was the largest limitation for me. So, because of the nerve damage, I didn't have like a really intense sense of pain per se, but I couldn't lift my arm over my head. My elbow was stuck in this bent position. I even had a tough time moving my forearm and my hand around, really struggled to turn my palm facing down, which, makes typing very difficult. It
Mm,
makes carrying things or lifting things over my head very difficult. I spent a lot of times talking to the gym teacher saying, "Hey, I can't do these things," which is really hard as a kid when all you really want is to be just like everybody else.
yeah.
Yeah, so, there were ways I was born with that very determined, motivated gene where while I did struggle with all of these limitations, I did actually end up playing volleyball growing up through all the way through college. I got a scholarship to play Division II volleyball at a university in Ohio. But largely, I figured out ways around my limitation and disconnected from my body. My goal was to beat my body into submission, pretend like this limitation didn't exist,
Yeah.
was going to keep going until something severe stopped me. And so while on the outside it sounds like a Disney movie, like, "Oh wow, you overcame this thing to play volleyball." It was not a very healthy mental state for me, if
Yeah.
I'm being honest.
Yeah. You're like,
And
we're just
we
gonna pretend like this isn't happening. Just go to the background. I'm gonna push through this no matter what it's going to cost me in the future to just do this thing right now.
Absolutely. I think so many of us can relate to that. There's a
Yeah.
little bit of this, let's call it a hero complex that we have. We think of
Mhm.
all of these incredible stories people have of overcoming some severe pain. They fell hiking a mountain. There's an Olympian who shattered her ankle upon landing one of her jumps and still stuck the landing. There's all of these things that we see and we're like, wow, that's amazing. And it puts something deep in our subconscious that we also have this ability to push through pain and struggle, which we do. And there's a time and
Yeah.
place where that may need to be possible, but we don't get a gold star at the end of
Yeah.
this life for pushing through the most low back pain?
Yeah. That's true. That's true. And the thing is our brain, yes, it is the strongest pharmacy on planet Earth, I always say. So you can produce enough adrenaline to push through pain. Um, but on the flip side, our brain is also amazing, which you used your brain and the capacity to figure out a way to heal yourself and, address what was really going on. And so what was the moment that you were like, "Okay, I'm no longer going to push this in the background. I'm going to try to figure out what is like happening and how I can fix this. Like, was there a certain moment that this happened? Were you sick and tired of being sick and tired? What was that like for you?
I think at the time, I was fully content to ignore the problem until I moved out to Boulder in 2010. And I started as a personal trainer because, as you can imagine, I became very obsessed with anatomy and physiology from a young age. I could speak in medical lingo by the time I was 8. I was very interested in the body because of what had happened to me, even if I didn't necessarily think there was something I could do about it. I was really passionate about seeing if I could help other people because empathy is very powerful. And I knew that I could absolutely be able to empathize with people who were looking to get out of a similar situation. So I did a lot of corrective exercise with people and happened to meet this lady at a gym where I was training who did this very obscure type of fascia release. And I really hadn't even heard of fascia much. We certainly talked about connective tissue in my undergrad degree. I'm an exercise physiology major, but not a whole lot was talked about besides the fact that it was attaching ligaments to bones. We'll keep it at that. So I decided to try this thing with zero expectations. I figured it was going to be just like everything else I'd tried, which maybe it helped a little bit in the moment or for a day, and then it was going to go right back. But within that first, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of that session, I thought, oh my God, I know this is different from anything else that I've been doing. There was really intense compression, but there was also movement where I had to move this arm that I wanted to ignore, that I wanted to disconnect from, that I clearly had come to see as some kind of burden in my life. And I had to start moving and engaging it. And through that process, so many things changed. So within 3 months, I saw more of a difference in the feel and function of my arm than I had in a lifetime of all the other things I tried. So that bend in my elbow started to release. My shoulder started working differently. Muscles started firing that hadn't before. I started regaining some of my range of motion back. I had a lot of emotional releases, I'll tell you that. There's so many things stored up in that tissue, and it was amazing. It completely changed my life. I decided that I was going to go learn everything I could about fascia and learn as many different modalities to work on it as I could, and pivoted my career. I stopped doing training and switched to fascia release because I was getting way better results with fascia release than I ever was getting with corrective exercise. So definitely was the catalyst for me to be where I'm at, obsessed with this thing and trying to help as many people realize it's not as complicated as we think, or it's not as mysterious as we think.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And so, okay, describe to us that first session. So that first session, you realized like this is unlike anything else. And how old were you at this point?
Let's see. I was 23. 23
Okay,
years old.
so literally born with this thing. So for 23 years, you dealt with this thing. You went to all sorts of doctors. You can speak the lingo of medical, and you're even in school studying the body. And you have a 15-20 minute session with this lady who is talking about fascia that was kind of brushed over. Would you say that that's fair?
Mhm.
Brushed over at university. And what was she doing, or what was she having you do that was like, this is different?
Well, the most stark difference was the active movement component. Most of the treatments that we're familiar with, when you really stop to think about it, are largely passive. We are slapping an ice pack or a heat pack on something. We're putting a TENS unit on something and laying there. We're laying on a table and having someone else do something to our body as we check out and think about what we need to do for the rest of the day. But that's really not how we can create fast change in the body. We have to be an active participant in our healing process. And that's true for so many aspects of
Oh
our
yeah.
health. We
Yeah.
can't sit back and let someone else do the work. And I realized that that was pretty much everything that I had tried. I had all these tools and gadgets and devices and laid
All the
on
good.
hundreds of tables for treatment by other people without engaging the one thing that was my problem, which was the nervous system. I was having a nerve issue, and the only way we can start to rewire patterns and interrupt poor movement patterns is by doing a movement ourselves. So it was a big emotional hurdle for me because when you choose to ignore something for a really long time and suddenly you have to look it right in the face, it's
Mhm.
hard. I remember having tears of frustration because I wanted to move my body in certain ways, but it felt so difficult. But the progress that was being made was like, wow, once we released this, it didn't just go right back. I felt like every time I was going in, I was able to make progress instead of starting at square one, which had been true for everything else that I had
Mhm.
tried.
So was she pressing on you on a point and then you had to move your arm in a certain plane? Like what was like the physical act of what you were doing to, you know, to make this happen?
So it was, she actually compressed fascia with her feet, which is actually what I do now. I combine a bunch of different modalities, including hers that I've learned over the years. And that foot compression, you'd be like, that can't possibly be
So
helpful,
she's
but it
like
covers
pushing her foot on you.
it. Pushing is it's not quite the right word. It's more of a lean to compress, and the foot actually takes up a pretty large surface area. So while we can add a much more powerful compression or more weight, it's not as intense as someone sticking a thumb or an elbow in you with that really tiny point of contact. We are able to grab so many layers of fascia as well as really deep layers, which is another thing that can be really challenging to get to, right? Fascia isn't a sausage casing that just goes around the outside of your muscle. It's layer on layer on layer all the way down to the bone. And so if we're not compressing enough and moving our body in different directions, we're not going to be able to affect or hydrate those layers that are really deep. And those are often the ones that are causing most of the issues. It's not something that's very mild and superficial at the surface. So she would compress things with her foot. And then while that area was compressed, I'd be circling my wrist or reaching my arm over my head or doing some kind of a shoulder rotation, some type of a movement near that joint that was able to stretch in a more three-dimensional fashion than what we're typically used to. Static stretching, which, you know, I don't know if you want to get me started on my feelings of static stretching, but it's only stretching in one plane of motion or, one plane. We're
Yeah.
lengthening muscle fibers in one plane, and we need to actually cross fiber. We need to go over in all kinds of different directions in order to pull the wrinkles out of the plastic wrap.
Yeah, I love that. I love that description. It is important. I have a trainer who I have a love-hate relationship with. And all he's been working on with me is fascia release. So he holds certain points and does the pressure, and then I have to move in a certain, different ranges of motion. And it's like, oh my God, I hate this. And then I love it because I feel so much more relief than I've had and different with just getting a massage and things like that. And I do like getting massages, and I think that, doing a variety of things is good. But that fascia is literally just, yeah, it's like the untold story. It's like this thing, because I did always used to believe that fascia was like that saran wrap, like that one layer. And as I've learned, like you said, it's like intertwined, multidimensional. And so it's yeah, I love how you said it's like our second nervous system, because that's like, yeah, that's gold. Like that helps my brain like visualize it. So that's so cool. Okay, so you go to this session. She's doing this thing. I'm like picturing her foot on your shoulder and like on your body. Um, and then you realize like this is giving you relief that in over 20 years you haven't had. And so what were your next steps to learn more?
Well, I went to learn a few different modalities. So I learned Rossiter, I learned kinetics. I started studying Thomas Myers and the anatomy trains. I started getting my hands on just about any book about fascia I could get, which truly there's not a lot out there. Even, well, 10, let's see, oh my gosh, like almost 15 years ago, there's not a lot out there. So you really had to go hunting and find online courses or find old textbooks
Well,
because for
10, 15, 20 years ago, they didn't even, I mean, I don't know how many years go by really fast, but
yeah.
it wasn't like even acknowledged really. Like you said, at university, it was like brushed over. So this is a topic and a part of the body that is more and more being discovered in science. So yeah, so like you're like back in the day, you're like, where can I find this information?
It's so hard. Even now, there are things that I've learned and I know to be true, and I'll go and write an article about it and look for some kind of a source. And I'm like, I can't find
Find
this.
it.
And I know that it's true, not just through thousands of anecdotal experiences that I've had and my clients have had, but there's not enough widespread information about it. Or some
Yeah.
of the things I've read even still are a little old school, or they're not quite getting to the communication element, or they're not quite landing on how impactful this is for so many things that we think are other problems. So
Well,
things that
yeah, if it's
it's a
just
joint
pain.
problem. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
if it's just pain, we can give you a pill.
yeah.
There's
Or
nothing you could do about your pain, but just like take this pill and like
or we get really honed in on the area that hurts, that we'll
that
say
is so
this is
true.
a joint problem, this is a disc problem, this is it's just a psoas problem,
No,
and
it's a
that's
systemic
so
problem.
far from the reality of how our body works. Most of the times it's not a structural problem, it's a fascia problem. And while our fascia is all connected, it's technically one uninterrupted, interconnected system that functions together. There is a bit of a pulley system within it that keeps our body balanced. And so when one area starts to shrink up and become restricted or dehydrated, it throws off the entire body's pulley system. And where we end up feeling pain is often not the source of that crumpled up ball of plastic wrap. So there is a bit of learning that goes into what I call pain patterns of, okay, my low back is hurting, but what's actually the problem here? It's probably that I have really tight quads and tight adductors. Oh, but the back of my neck is hurting, but actually, is it because my chest is really tight and the front of my neck from slouching in a sitting position all day? There's a couple of those things that do require a bit of learning, but it really demystifies a lot of the pain we're experiencing. We just are trying to restore balance to the pulley system. And as the title of your podcast implies, it is about the whole body. We can't just focus on the one joint that's a problem. Even just the joint above and below, we have to look at the whole thing and how our alignment is affected.
Yeah, I always go back to wholeness, because if we're just looking at one thing, that should be a warning, by the way. If you're working with a practitioner that's only looking at one thing and it's the one thing you told them, like when I have clients come to see me, I'm like, when I first either remotely am working with them and scanning them or they're in person, I actually don't ask them why they're here first. And I always tell them, I care why you came. You'll notice I'm not going to ask you that question or what like is going on with them up front because I want to evaluate the whole body and evaluate, everything without being led down any one path. And so I think that when you're working with someone, it's so important that they're working with the whole you. And like you said, there's emotions that are stored in the fascia. So it's not like, oh, you have this tight, joint or limited mobility here. And so it's just physical. It can also be emotional as well.
Absolutely. The mind body connection is so powerful. There's no way to separate those two. And that's another red flag, I think, for me, if you're working with someone that's only interested in the clinical side of things. Oh, this one muscle isn't functioning, or this one thing is the problem. Or someone's swinging all the way the other direction where they're saying, oh, this is just a past life trauma. And
Yeah, mind over matter.
yeah, where I'm like, okay, there absolutely is this middle ground. And I think fascia is a great representation of that middle ground is yes, it's a physical structure in our body, it's an organ, it has these sensory receptors, but it is this larger picture when it comes to what have we experienced? What are all of the things that have passed through our fascial system? One of my mentors used to say, fascia is like the paper that your life story is written on. And so
Oh,
there is
wow.
this element to, yeah, if are you chronically getting injured? Do you have chronic pain? Even if you just have one area, is it a result of years and years of stress and trauma that have built up in your life? That's absolutely possible.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I agree. Absolutely. All right. So, what people that are listening, okay, they have some lower back discomfort. There's tightness in their neck and in their shoulders. They're having these things. And would you say, like, in those, like, when do you know to start working on your fascia? I mean, I know we should be working on it all the time, by the way. Like, okay. But most people are going to say, well, nothing's wrong. I feel fine, or they'll wait for the one thing to happen. So I guess I have a couple questions. Number one, when should people know that it's most likely fascia? And two, what are some things, if people say, I feel fine, nothing's wrong with me, what are some things people can do to nourish the fascia system and to just in terms of prevention?
Yeah, well, any type of ache and pain is likely a fascia problem. And I want to state, as someone who I understand the other side, because I went years and years and years straight up ignoring my thing. But that's the reason I want to say it is we often think something isn't that bad, or oh, well, my lower back only hurts occasionally. But these are things that build over time, as we were
Yes.
talking about earlier. So even if you're like, oh yeah, I guess I had a bout of low back pain last year, or a couple years ago I had plantar fasciitis and it went away. The news flash is rarely does something naturally go away. What's happening is your body figures out a compensation so that you don't have to feel that pain anymore. And slowly but surely, compensation on top of compensation is going to build until something else might get out of whack. So, if you've experienced any aches or pains in the past, I would say it's time to work on your fascia. If you feel that you're struggling with flexibility, you feel much more stiff than you used to, if there's any activity that you used to do and you can't now because you're quote unquote getting too old, or there's something that isn't quite right when you do this activity, it's not the activity, it's always the body that we're bringing to the activity. So that's a pretty good indicator that you've got something going on in the fascia as well. If we want to start working on the fascia, which great news, we can. There's no point that's too far gone. We can always start working and addressing this thing. We want to stick with that same compression and active movement principle. So while I do work on people in practice where I'm also stepping on them and doing some of the same work, You can do this on your own with tools that you likely already own or at least have access to at your gym, like foam rollers or a lacrosse ball or a similar massage ball of sorts. We just want to compress an area that feels tender or tight in some fashion, but then stay on that spot and see if you can move the closest joints around. So a good example would be if you want to release your quads. We all know you could lay with your thighs on the roller, kind of like you're in a plank position, and just use your arms to pull yourself up and down the quads like a typical foam rolling activity, right? But instead, if you were to find a spot along the quads that feels really sore, let your body sink into that spot, start doing some deep breathing, and then slowly bend your heels back. So you're bending from the knees like you're doing a hamstring curl. Slowly bend your knees back and straighten them back out. And now we're doing some type of active movement. We're slowing it down. We're breathing deep. That's going to get one, deeper layers of fascia. It's going to two, get more cross fibering, which increases your hydration. And three, it's going to start changing the way that your quad functions instead of simply rolling back and forth on some more superficial adhesions. So that would be my number one suggestion. If you want to start doing this for yourself, see if you can lay on one spot and very slowly and intentionally move something nearby to feel how everything starts stretching around the area of compression.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. My trainer tells me that I need to like sit on a tennis ball and just kind of like move like while when I'm sitting. I'm like, I don't know, but I've done the whole tennis, not tennis ball, but the blue ball. Is that a lacrosse ball? I don't know. Like
It could
that's
be, yeah.
a stronger ball. And I've done where, I've moved with the ball and it's like, going in and I don't know. I think it's just a discovery and just finding what works for you. And you have videos, right? You have some videos that people can access, maybe jump into, and can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I do have an online video library called Roller Remedy, which has, well, it's surely got over 100 videos these days. There's over 45 different techniques, but it'll walk you through how to start releasing these areas of fascia on your own because you can make so much progress by yourself. I've done a lot of the work for you if you have a specific pain like low back pain, plantar fasciitis, neck pain. There's programs within Roller Remedy that you can follow along for specific pains, and I'll tell you where to go if you're not sure where to go to start. But again, there's so many ways that you can take your own power back and start understanding more about your body. You don't always have to wait for your next massage appointment or just accept that this is a part of your life now. There's so many ways that we can start um, changing the texture of our fascia, rehydrating our body, and restoring health to all of these different areas.
I love that. So where can they find those videos? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is at Movement by Julia. If you want to learn more about the online courses I have, it's all at movementbyjulia.com.
Awesome. And you guys, we'll put all of that in the show notes. And Julia, thank you for bringing awareness to our fascia or fascia, depending on, how you pronounce it. It's all good, right?
It's all good.
Um, yeah, it was so interesting and wonderful talking with you today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.